anti-Semitism. But first, if you need evidence for just how bad things have gotten, take a look at this tweet. Just a few months ago, Candace tweeted, "Ban pornography. It's a psychological weapon intended to weaken our men." She followed up by saying that it was created by the
I mean, this could technically be true, but what she says
people
next.
among us, and that we should stigmatize every person who defends or profits from it. Now, most Christians supported this sentiment, believing that she was standing for Christian values that promote family and well-being. She even tweeted that the men who struggle with pornography are the intended victims. But this is where things get complicated. You see,
so far so good, right? But one of the things that really gets me is inconsistency.
her stance made it all the more confusing when she defended and protected someone like Andrew Tate, who, right before his arrest, was bragging about exploiting men with corn, saying,
"Chicks would sit there and hit a keyboard that wasn't plugged in. And me and my brother, and eventually some staff I trained, would do all the talking. We were taking their money, all of it. I had these guys selling their houses, life savings, loans, all of it to me. Give me it all. You never got that. No, give a solitary
So it's ironic that she condemned corn as a weapon to weaken others, yet Tate bragged about doing exactly that just months before his arrest. She said that those who...
Andrew Tate is literally the problem. He is part of the problem. He's like a doctor that poisons you and then makes fun of you for being poisoned and then tells you to be unpoisoned like him. And he gives you some of the medicine. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, I was interested in him at first, but then I found out, you know, how he made his money, how he's not sorry, and, you know, supplying pornography and taking advantage of weak men and then making fun of weak men online. You know, it just doesn't sit well with me. And Candace Owens, you know, I used to appreciate, you know, the alternative viewpoint that she would have, especially around 2020. But like this last 6 months has just been absolutely weird for her. Like, I understand her splitting with Daily Wire if they have some, you know, differences and things just don't work out anymore. But like the Kanye West stuff, the constant defending Andrew Tate, like, let's just
those who profit off of it should be stigmatized. Yet, right before the pandemic, Tate tweeted, "I make corn. I made so much corn that I made millions. You consume corn. I am God. You are an effing loser." But we knew that already. Learn how to make money by making corn here. But she never stigmatized Tate for it. And all of this is weird because even in her most recent interview of Tate, she talked to him about how bad she thinks that corn is. But this is the same guy who only a few years ago bragged about getting men addicted to corn in order to control them, tweeting, "I super hope the corn addiction gets out of control and ruins everyone's lives. I hope everyone suffers, and I don't want to help anyone break free at all. Keep watching Cam Girls. I want more money." And if you're doubting that this was his Twitter account, he confirmed it in multiple other clips online as well. So now keep in mind that this is the same guy who recorded himself during the COVID lockdowns, saying that he was still running a webcam business. And despite this, Candace still claims that his webcamming business was over 10 years ago.
What he said 10 years ago.
So this video is from 10 years ago.
Looking back 10 years.
When you talk about Candace from 10 years ago.
Fortunately, I had no cameras in my face 10 years ago.
The idea that you did something 10 years ago.
This is 10 years ago.
Talk about these things from 10 years ago.
Again, if you found Candace 10 years ago.
Which contradicts the facts, Tate's own recorded testimony, and his countless tweets. And still to this day, she continues campaigning for Tate, spreading all kinds of falsehoods for him. But all of this has left Christians confused. I mean, on the...
First off, I'm confused because why campaign for Tate? He has very few Christian values. He has more conservative political values than Christian values. You know, sleeping with multiple women, yada, yada, yada. Like, he doesn't actually have those values. And notice how, and you say, oh, his values changed. Yeah, after he got famous and canceled, he had to clean up his act a little bit in order to be slightly more palatable to people. But
on the one hand, she talks about her strong conviction against corn, while on the other, she continues to platform and defend Tate despite his entire empire being built on corn. Well, the only way that this would make sense is if Candace didn't know Tate or about Tate prior to his arrest. So, is that what happened? Well, we may have gotten a little more insight into that question during a recent live stream Candace did a few days ago, but not based on what she said, instead based on what was behind her. If you've watched any of her streams from her home office, you may have noticed something interesting. If you zoom in right here, you can see a picture of her husband, George Farmer, from what appears to be several years ago. And if you look to the side of him, he's sitting next to none other than Andrew Tate. Now, we knew that Tate and Candace had met before, but what we didn't know was how deep it really went. According to her husband, he's known Tate for a very long time.
I've known Andrew since before Andrew was Andrew. You know what I mean? I've known Andrew since before he was famous, I guess. Andrew is is a great guy.
But what most people didn't know was that Candace also met Tate several years ago, which could explain why, in her past episodes talking about Tate's charges, Candace didn't distance herself from Tate, but instead went to extreme lengths to protect him, even using an episode to discredit an alleged victim who accused Tate of abuse. And this is where things started looking really suspect. Given that Tate's abuser also accused another man when she was 15 years old, and that man was sentenced to 24 years in prison because of it. Because of this, Candace made an episode trying to discredit this girl's credibility. In the episode, she even went so far as to refuse to say the name of the convicted felon in order to protect his identity, while repeatedly mentioning the underage girl's name in the episode without censoring it.
Okay, it's just so sus that you would do that, right? And it's just like, I don't care if you're conservative or liberal, right? It just, there's something about that just doesn't feel right. What, you're going to protect the identity of the perpetrator who's still in jail, but not the little girl, and you're going to try to discredit the girl? Like, there's something about that just doesn't add up. And, you know, I don't know. I call it a gut feeling. It just feels off.
Involves a man who I am not going to name, and the only reason I'm not going to name him is because at the time of the allegations against him, Emma was in fact a minor. By the way, you're going to hear some beeps when I'm discussing this case. If I accidentally say his name, we intend to just beep it out.
It was almost as if Candace was willing to ignore or excuse the very values that she claims to stand for, all because of her personal loyalty to Andrew Tate. Another thing that Tate said in that tweet was that he was God, which is another thing that Candace claims to hate. She claims to hate blasphemy, and Christians have applauded her for defending Christian values by taking a stance against it. Earlier this year, she even posted a video condemning the rapper Lil Nas X for
that is mocking Jesus Christ, and it's obviously meant to be blasphemous.
But not even a month later, she endorsed Kanye's Vultures album, where Kanye says, "I'm the new Jesus," explicit. And this wasn't just art either. Following the release of his album,
this is why I stopped calling myself a conservative. It's when people like Candace Owens and other conservatives online that I used to rock with would start showing preferential treatment to people who share some of their ideological values and political values, and started but ended up compromising some of their other values. So, for example, you know, Candace Owens supports Kanye West's album where he commits blasphemy because he's conservative and his ideology is aligned with hers. But if a more woke or liberal person like Lil Nas X does the exact same thing, she's going to denounce him. What's the difference? The difference is one of them has a political ideology that aligns with her, and one of them does not. And so she's not actually worried about blasphemy. She's just using that as a tool to discredit people who have different ideologies than her. And then if someone like Kanye West, who has the same ideology as her, does it, she just completely ignores it.
Album, Kanye said multiple times that he's God. So if Candace was outraged by Lil Nas X for dressing up on a cross and she considered it to be blasphemy, then this whole picture of Kanye and him saying that he's the new Jesus should also be considered blasphemy. And just to be clear, given that she's friends with Kanye, I don't expect her to personally attack him, but there's also no need to go out of the way to promote this album if blasphemy really does bother her so much. And those aren't the only Christian values that Candace seems to turn a blind eye to. Candace has condemned and shamed countless women for being immodest, including Kim Kardashian and Madonna, by saying that they're basically punning corn on the internet for being nearly naked. But that same album she promoted in multiple tweets also features Kanye's naked wife on the cover. And as Candace herself said,
there needs to either be a real standard, right? Or there should be no double standards. We just need to have a real standard to not allow pornography on the internet.
She's also made several podcasts attacking rappers for having degenerate lyrics, but literally every single thing that she scolds and shames other rappers for promoting in their lyrics is also being promoted in Kanye's Vultures album. And rather than be infuriated with it, she praises it. Once again, her values seem to be compromised by selective loyalty. But Candace's loyalty to individuals like Andrew Tate and Kanye West is only one part of the problem. Her unwavering commitment to certain ideologies has led her down an even more dangerous path.
What is it about Hitler? Why is he the most evil? Where did the idea of a concentration camp come from? The Bolsheviks. Ataturk was Don Sigmund Freud was a Kabbalist. Yale was established by Frankists, Israelis that were working at the World Trade Center who were forewarned of the attack.
This is especially evident in her recent flirtation with...
And before we go on, one of the things I learned, recently is that just because someone like Candace Owens can spew facts about history, doesn't mean that they've compiled those, and they can make it sound good. It doesn't mean that they've actually compiled those facts correctly, contextually, nor have they analyzed them properly, right? Just because you can pick facts from history and then string them together in a way that looks like it leads to a certain conclusion, doesn't mean that that's actually correct, because history is actually a science. And there are a lot of things that go into analyzing history properly. And if you're an amateur, a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, right? Like you can go and find a few certain facts about history and skew it completely wrong. This is something that I'm still learning, and if you want to continue to follow my journey on that, maybe consider liking and subscribing. But
with anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, where her loyalty to these ideas has seemed to cause her to overlook facts and compromise her Christian values. You see, Candace has built a reputation for calling out misinformation and challenging mainstream media narratives. However, in recent years, Candace has become a powerful media figure herself, reaching nearly 60 million views per month, which surpasses the primetime viewership of major news networks like MSNBC. So her influence carries a lot of responsibility, making it crucial for her to remain steadfast in the Christian value of not bearing false witness. If you've been following her content lately, you can't help but notice that she seems to trace every world problem back to the Jews in some way. But the only problem is, she consistently gets her facts wrong. So much so that even Nick Fuentes, who's known as the most prolific anti-Semite of our generation, he even had to call her out for how much she gets wrong.
And she's calling them the Bolshevists, and she says that, you know, she gets all the details wrong about that. And then she says Stalin was Jewish. Stalin was not Jewish. And then she says Ataturk was secretly Jewish. Ataturk was not secretly Jewish. And then, you know, but I didn't say anything. I said, whatever. You know, I said, oh, well, you know, not everyone's perfect.
If Nick, listen very carefully, guys. If Nick is calling you out, you goofed. You have goofed off and made a fool of yourself. If this clown is calling you out for being inaccurate.
I said, yeah, it's not really a good look, but, you know, she's learning. I said she's going to get on the ball eventually, so I didn't say anything. I held my tongue, even though that was not really a good look, okay? You can't really go hard like that and stake the reputation of you and everybody on this and then, like, get it wrong really severely over and over. She's talking about, you know, all this stuff that, like, it just doesn't even really make any sense. You know, and the difference between me and her, one, I'm a really good researcher. Two, I really know what the fuck I'm talking about, because I've been doing this a long time.
Now, when someone with views as extreme as Nick Fuentes criticizes you for inaccuracies, that's a clear sign that something has gone seriously wrong. Now, we won't get too deep into the weeds here, but take a look at the Frankish conspiracy theory that she's been arguing for lately. She argued that Theodor Herzl, a Zionist leader who helped lay the foundation for the creation of Israel, was connected to the Frankists because they were from the same region. However, Jacob Frank was born in 1726 in a small town in modern-day Ukraine, and Herzl was born almost 400 miles away in Budapest almost 100 years later. I mean, to see the problem, this is like claiming that because a gang was founded 100 years and 400 miles from where you were born, that you must be a part of it. And she was also wrong about Leo Frank being a Frankist, a claim that lacks historical support and seems to be based on only a shared last name. She claimed that
You see my earlier point, right? Someone can pick little bits from history and string them together in a sentence, make it sound like it's true, and it's completely not true. Case in point.
the Frankists were responsible for mission Christians, which is something that they weren't even accused of. So the pattern of inaccuracies is frequent and concerning, particularly when discussing sensitive topics like these. And I get that it's easy to get caught up in compelling stories, but it's also crucial to approach these sorts of topics with careful research and an open mind. Scholars have found significant issues with all of these claims, and of course that doesn't mean that we should just dismiss these concerns outright, but it does mean that we should be especially cautious and make sure we're not unintentionally spreading harmful misinformation, especially when we have platforms as big as hers. So her frequent pattern of getting things wrong has understandably led to significant pushback against her claims. And this is one of the reasons for why her claims have been receiving so much pushback. One commenter on Twitter said, "Interesting. I don't recall anyone getting this triggered when Candace was dunking on blacks." And she responded by saying, "No, that was always allowed and encouraged," revealing once again her selective loyalty to certain ideologies over others. Some interpreted her response to be evidence that she was grifting the entire time she worked at the Daily Wire, which could be defended by taking a look at her documentary on George Floyd, The Greatest Lie Ever Sold. Now, of course, not everything that she said in this documentary was false, and many of us applauded her for the times when she looked at the facts and told uncomfortable truths. But if you watch the documentary alongside of the trial, you likely notice that she missed or ignored some critical facts. I mean, take a look at this clip from her documentary.
Would you agree that from the perspective of Officer King's body camera, it appears that Officer Chauvin's knee was more on Mr. Floyd's shoulder blade?
Yes.
So Candace tried to argue that Chauvin's knee was not on Floyd's neck, but on his shoulder blade. However, she didn't include the rest of the cross-examination, which revealed a much different story.
That moment in time, that the knee of the defendant was more towards the shoulder blade, is that right?
That is correct.
That was at a time where the ambulance had already arrived?
Yes.
Very shortly before they loaded Mr. Floyd onto the gurney?
That is correct.
And so the knee of the defendant was on Mr. Floyd's neck up until the time you just pointed out?
Yes, and when I viewed that video portion, that is the first time that I'd seen the knee of the defendant on the shoulder blade area.
Now, no matter what you think about the George Floyd trial, that's not the point of what I'm getting across here. It doesn't matter if you think that.
Okay, well, first off, this is a huge problem nowadays. I've noticed that this is why I stopped calling myself a conservative, because so many conservatives are getting this stuff wrong. They're just committing blatant acts of illogical, misrepresentation of facts, and it just doesn't work with me anymore. This happened in 2020 when I started realizing that these people actually are not representing things the way that they actually are, and it just made me really, really uncomfortable to just continue calling myself a conservative alongside people like Candace. So now I just call myself apolitical. I'll never fit in with the woke crowd, but I'm starting to not really appreciate how evidence and ideas are being selectively picked to paint a conservative narrative. Like, the world is bad enough as it is. We don't need to make things up to have something to be angry about, right? Like, come on, guys.
That he was in the right or the wrong for the sake of this video. The point is that by selectively editing the testimony, Candace presented a narrative that fit with her agenda, but didn't align with the full truth. And there are several other examples of this, like how she included a clip of a witness who was asked,
"Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, 'I ate too many drugs'?"
Yes, it did.
But she didn't show the rest of the conversation, in which the witness clarified.
Having heard it in context, you're able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there?
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, "I ain't no drugs."
But perhaps the most significant omission was when Candace brought in an anti-BLM investigator who claimed that Floyd died from an overdose. She included selective clips from the trial to support this claim, but omitted the strong evidence that disproved her claim.
Mr. Floyd died from positional asphyxia, which is a fancy way of saying he died because he had no oxygen left in his body.
You have lots of experience treating patients suffering from opioid overdose.
Yes, sir, I do.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury whether fentanyl overdose causes air hunger?
No, it does not. The only time it could is if you've overdosed, but it's not air hunger because you are going to sleep. You're not hungry at all, you're sleeping. When you watch those videos and we go through them, what is his respiration do? He's breathing, he's talking, he's not snoring. He is saying, please, please get off of me, I want to breathe, I can't breathe. That is not a fentanyl overdose. That is somebody begging to breathe.
If a person is suffering from a fentanyl overdose, would you describe that person then as alert?
No, sir. They're not going to be alert. They're going to be sleeping.
Would you describe them as oriented?
No. They're going to be, their brain is going to be in sleep mode or not breathing mode.
And what's your...
He knew exactly where he was.
Essentially, what I'm getting from this is that Candace Owens is starting to go down. She's starting to become what she's fighting against. And what I mean by that is that, she's always been accusing the woke left and the Democrats of misrepresenting information and spewing lies and changing things up so that, to construe a narrative. Well, it seems that is actually turning into what she herself is doing. And whether she's doing it intentionally or not, I don't know. But the moral of the story is that you become what you fight against. If you're constantly fighting the left and you're constantly attacking people for misconstruing information and showing things to be slightly different than what they are, eventually you can run the risk of actually being, just in that issue, in that same thing. And so that's why having grounded beliefs and really sticking to those beliefs and not just your loyalties to other people, like Andrew Tate or whatever, is so important. And so it is sad to see the downfall of Candace Owens. Like, I did enjoy her content in the beginning. I thought she was very insightful and helpful in the beginning. But a lot of what she's showing now just isn't really working for me. And so for those reasons, I feel like I just gotta have to wait and see. But Ruslan said something really interesting, talking about how the massive what do you call it? Well, he'll tell you.
See, the issue isn't that there are Jays that have questionable business ethics and business practice, or there are Jays that work in industries that are completely deplorable. Those things exist, just like there are white dudes in biker gangs that commit violent crimes, just like there are black folks in parts of the country that commit gun violence. All of these things exist. The issue is when you take one segment of a community, you take that out, and then you hypergeneralize and you say, all black people want to worship George Floyd as a martyr.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What are you talking about? Like, are there folks on the fringes of the left that are doing that like buy into that narrative and saw him as a martyr, sure. But all black culture, you know what I mean?
I have a question.
Jewish culture, like that's the psychological error that people make with conspiracy theories and hypergeneralizations. That's where she's wrong.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what are you saying? What are you saying? You find it interesting that it wasn't an issue until she started coming at the pews, the Jays.
What? Why do I what?
Find it interesting that like she went after black folks, but then
no one had an issue.
No one
with
had
it.
an issue.
No one
and
had an
then
issue
people
with
had an issue with it when they went to the Jays. CP says it kind of proves her point in a way.
And she did say that. She said she was being encouraged at the time. Guess who she was working for? Conservative outlet. She was working for Dennis Prager. She was. I don't think she was a Daily Wire yet.
Okay.
And so she was encouraged to say these things about, or not encouraged, probably just, they were kind of cool with it,
Yeah.
And which, by the way, she shouldn't have been saying that. Like, she shouldn't have been hyper generalizing black people, like because black people aren't a monolith. Neither are Jewish people. Neither are white people.
Yeah.
Like, why is it that we can't all just be consistent? Don't hyper generalize anybody. Don't make broad, sweeping claims and associations about entire groups of people. Like, that's why she got taken off of YouTube recently. And part of the reason is because, mainly because Kanye West said stuff, but she still put it out there. Patrick David talks about this a little bit more.
Scroll up, Lamore. There you go. When was this?
October 17th, 2022. She put it out on August 7th of this year. So it was uploaded on August 7th, but it is still live.
So, so this is an older one that go back to it on what it says, zoom in a little bit. On October 17th, you sat down with me for an interview at my house. Now that I have my own platform. Oh, so meaning at Daily Wire, they didn't want to do it. And now they do want to do it. And then, so Spotify.
Because Daily Wire is smart and they try not to break YouTube's terms of service, and even though they still do every now and then.
It keeps it on and YouTube takes it down and gives a strike.
That's what I'm saying. So Spotify's cool with. So I'm just curious. Are their terms and conditions the same as Spotify?
This is the part that I'm not a fan of this, man. Like, listen, have the conversation. Let them have the conversation and let them see what it's about. And other people will either agree, tear it apart. Argument leads to more conversation and dialogue. As long as there is no inciting violence as somebody's doing. Why is Spotify comfortable keeping it on and YouTube is not comfortable keeping it on? That's what's weird to me. So this is why.
And I would agree with that because, wouldn't you want the idiots to expose themselves? Right? Like, if people just are allowed to say what they want, as long as it's not inciting violence or causing real harm, and people think that incitement to violence is protected by free speech. No, it's not. Inciting violence is a real thing, and it's not okay, and it should not be tolerated. For example, there's a huge difference between saying the following, all right? Guys, hear me out on this. There's a massive difference between saying, I disagree with this person's policies, and I think they should change it, and we should vote differently next election, all right? Versus, this person made a policy that I really hate, and his wife works at such and such hospital, and his daughter goes to XYZ daycare, maybe pay them a visit, right? One is fine and necessary for democracy. The other one can get someone killed. You see the difference, right? And so conservatives have gone a little bit too far to the extreme where, you're just allowed to say anything you want. I don't agree with that. You can't just... Freedom comes with responsibility, guys, okay? There's a couple of things that you shouldn't just say whatever you want, whenever you want. Things like, there are things that are not protected by free expression, such as, CP. Child, XYZs, that stuff that's very illegal, that's not protected by freedom of expression. I don't care what you call it. That shouldn't be protected. Inciting violence. What else is there? Giving out information that could compromise the security of a nation. I don't think that should be protected because people could die from it, right? And so there's a couple of things that should be protected. Criticizing the government should always be protected. You should always be allowed to criticize the government, because that's part of what freedom entails and democracy. But there's just a massive difference between, generalizing an entire group of people and trying to... See, I understand where YouTube's coming from. I don't necessarily agree that they should have... They shouldn't have banned her... Well, she's not banned, but she's demonetized. And you know, the thing is, YouTube doesn't have to pay you to say things that they think are not okay, that are not appropriate. But, you know, if you... Sorry, I'm trying to riff now. I'm trying to think clearly, but it's kind of not working. It's late and my brain has stopped working. But I'll probably make another video about this because I'm just not really with it now. Let me think. I think it's a good idea for idiots to expose themselves as being idiots. That way we could be like, hey man, there's a problem with what you're saying. And so I believe with that kind of free speech. But when you start generalizing negative stereotypes about an entire group of people and say, these people are X, let's just say people X are a threat to society. What does that do in the mind of the listener? Someone who's impressionable and maybe doesn't have the critical thinking skills because our education system sucks, aka, you know, the West nowadays, they can take that and internalize it and turn it into fear and anger towards an entire people group of people. And so I understand where YouTube is coming from on that sense, where Kanye West may have generalized an entire group of people in a negative way that may have caused people to feel negatively towards them, which could lead those people to commit acts of like hate crimes or hate speech or whatever, or violence against those people. I understand where they're coming from, and this is the really tricky part because it's such a gray line, right? Some types of hate speech are clearly defined. If you say, I don't like X group of people for X reason, and y'all should go and do horrible things to X group of people, that's obviously not okay, and I don't support that. And I don't support platforms like X making that freely available. Because I've started to see that that's just harmful, and I can no longer comfortably call myself a free speech absolutist. I'm so close. So pretty close. I would always love to err on the side of free speech because I love freedom. But, you know, recent events like the riots in London and England and all those things kind of get me to a point where, yeah, I'm not overly excited about being a free speech absolutist anymore. I do think there are some things that just should not be allowed. Because I think we're starting to see that people's words really do have consequences. And as podcasters get bigger and bigger and bigger, by the way, subscribe because I'm starting a podcast. If you find anything I say interesting, basically at the beginning of my journey, so subscribe and come hang out and see where this goes. But I think people like Candace Owens need to actually hold themselves a little bit more accountable to being accurate with the information and not saying, you know, crazy things that always tend to land around a certain group of people being responsible for everything. Those are my immediate thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, got some interesting clarity and context. If you want more videos, you can like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.